text was Daniel. He knelt down on his knees and prayed as was his custom since early days. Today our text is very similar. Daniel 3:15. You actually go to Daniel 3:15 at the end into 3:16. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said in the 17th verse, if that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, we could actually call this message, but if not, but we'll just choose to call it Living Consistent Life Part 2. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship any gold image which you have set up. Now, as we set this up, I want to give you an outline. We'll look through these verses in outline form and go from there. In verses 1 through 7, it's the plan of Nebuchadnezzar. Let's look at those. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its width was 6 cubits. I got a little bit of a ring in this microphone for some reason today. Is the back mic shut off, Matt? Okay. The height of this statue, depending on the commentary you read, was somewhere around 12.5 feet by 125 feet, or it was 9 feet by 90 feet. 9 feet wide by 90 foot tall, or 12.5 feet wide by 125 foot tall. It was a big statue. And he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So this is the plan that's coming down. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and the officials of the province to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces, officials of the province gathered together for dedication of the image of the King Nebuchadnezzar set up, and it stood before the image the king had set up. And the herald cried aloud, to you it is commanded, O people, nation, languages. At the time you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, or the psaltery, the symphony, and all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down to worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. At that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, the symphony, and all kinds of music, all the people, nation, language fell down and worshiped the golden image which King Nebuchadnezzar set up. That's the plan. Now the purpose. The purpose was worship. Therefore, at the time the Chaldeans came forward to accuse the Jews, they spoke to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the psaltery, and the symphony, and all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the gold image. Whoever does not fall down and worship be cast in the midst of a burning fire furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, these men have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your God or worship the gold image which you set up. Now the promise of the king Nebuchadnezzar, or the promise of the King Jesus. King Nebuchadnezzar can make his promise, and he'll go to the fire furnace, but King Jesus got another promise, and a promise of protection. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now, you are ready Now are you ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the psaltery, simply all kinds of music? You'll fall down and worship the image which I have made good. But if you do not worship, you will be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. We don't even have to think about it. If that is the case, O God, if that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. He will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the image, the gold image which you have set up. 19 through 25, the protection. Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and expression on his face changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore, he spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times hotter, 7 times more than it usually was heated. He commanded certain mighty men of valor, who were in the army, to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them in the burning furnace. These men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments. They were cast in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent, the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose up in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, Did we not cast 3 men down in the midst of the fire? They answered and said to the king, O true, O king, look. He answered, I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they are hot, and they are not hurt. And the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. Now the proclamation. Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fire furnace, and spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire. The satraps, the administrators, the governors, the kings, and the counselors gathered together. And they saw these men on whose body the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor the garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, Blessed be the God of the servant of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted him. And they had frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies, and they should not serve or worship any gods except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks a thing amiss against God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces. Their homes shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. And then the king proclaimed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Daniel, that word Daniel means God is judge. And we seen last week that Daniel was left protected in the lion's den and come out of it unscathed. Daniel's name, we see in Daniel 1:7, his name was changed to Belshazzar, which means Bel protect his life, God protect his life. Bel was one of their gods. And we see how God did protect his life, only it wasn't one of their gods, it was the one and only God, the living God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Shadrach's name meant tender, but they changed it to Hanai. I'm sorry, I got it backwards. His name was Hanai, means Jehovah has changed Hananiah's name to Shadrach, which meant tender. Meshach, his name was actually Michelle, and it meant prayer or prayer. They changed his name to Meshach, meant Ezra. Azariah meant Jehovah's aid, or Jehovah aids. And his name was changed to Abednego, a servant of Nebo. I bring these names up because the first thing that happened when they were taken into captivity, the enemy tried to re-indoctrinate them. The enemy tried to change their thinking. The Bible says, "A man thinketh in his heart, so is he." And they tried to re-identify them with the gods of their land. But let me tell you something. When you look at this chapter 3, the re-identification program hadn't been real successful. And you can see it building up to this point. Remember in chapter 2, and in chapter 1, that the test came with their food and what they were to eat. And they didn't want to eat in the king's table, didn't want to defile themselves at the king's table, so they ate that which was kosher, that which was permitted under the law of God. And how God gave them favor in the sight of the head eunuch, how God gave them favor in the sight of the king. But here comes another test. And this test, let me tell you something that's very important. You got to know where you stand before the test comes. Because if you don't know where you stand, or who you stand with, or who you stand for, you're going to fall and fail in the test. So we see Nebuchadnezzar, he's a narcissistic maniac, and he's very similar to King Darius that Daniel had to deal with. Nebuchadnezzar is a narcissist. He's got a lot of self-love, and I'll prove it to you in a minute. But King Darius, he was trapped by his administrators that he trusted that were narcissists. He was trapped by their thinking because they wanted to bring something against Daniel so they could be promoted over Daniel and bring Daniel down. The same idea is in this chapter with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Look here. The king's a narcissist. The king has built this big image. We don't know exactly how tall, but somewhere between 125 feet tall, somewhere between 9 and 12 and a half feet wide. And he sticks it out in the plain of Dura. And the plain of Dura is a big flat area. This statue could have been seen from miles away. Now, we don't know what the statue was made of, but I got a feeling it was probably made of him himself. And he wanted everybody to bow down and worship him. We see kind of a hint of that when Saddam Hussein, or as President Bush 1 used to say, Saddam Hussein had statues himself all over his kingdom over there. And they brought those statues down. We don't know if he wanted people to fall down and worship him, but you see the idea of all these statues. Well, this king, Nebuchadnezzar, had one big statue. And I think it was himself, and he wanted people to fall down and worship him. And then he says, he gives this decree. When you hear the music, you're supposed to dance to the music. No, you're supposed to fall to the music. Lots of things are happening on MTV today. Lots of things are happening with these recording artists. Not only is it music now it's visual stuff. And you're dancing to this, and you're doing this. They brought in the visual, they brought in the feelings, they brought in the sensory, the oral. So all the senses are being touched. This is what Nebuchadnezzar was doing. When you hear the music, this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to fall down and worship this false god. Now, he doesn't call it a false god. You're going to fall down and you're going to worship. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they weren't going to buy that. They had stability. They were not easily moved. They were not easily changed. They weren't swayed by public opinion. It doesn't matter if everybody in the school is doing something. If it's morally wrong in God's word, it's wrong. It don't matter what the Supreme Court says. It doesn't matter what the local court says. It can be legal as far as man's concerned, but if it's not legal as far as God's concerned, we best not be doing it, because this is